Why your cast iron fails cheap beef, the 3-day vinegar marinade that replaces baking soda forever. That title probably made you think this video was about technique, about some clever chemistry trick that softens inferior meat. But I need to stop you right there, because what I discovered while researching this goes much deeper than a simple marinade formula. Stay with me through the next few minutes, because the real reason your cast iron struggles with budget cuts of beef has almost nothing to do with vinegar or baking soda at all. The answer sits somewhere between your pan's history and your own expectations, and it's something most people never consider. If you're watching this channel, you probably own a piece or two of heritage cast iron. Maybe it came from your mother, maybe you pulled it from an estate sale. Either way, you've learned that these pans aren't just tools. They're witnesses to decades, sometimes a century or more, of family meals. That matters for what we're about to discuss. Subscribe if you care about getting the most from what you own, and more than that, I'd genuinely love to hear in the comments below, what's the toughest cut of meat you've ever tried to cook in your inherited cast iron? Real answers help me understand what's actually happening in your kitchens. I'll be reading. Now, here's the thing that surprised me. Most videos about marinating cheap beef focus on acid or enzymes breaking down muscle fiber. That's not wrong, exactly. It's just incomplete. And wait, this part is crucial, so I need your full attention for a moment. Your modern pan, the one with that slick non-stick coating, treats every cut of beef the same way. The surface is dead. It doesn't respond. It doesn't change. It just slides things around. Your cast iron, though, it's alive. Every time you cook on it, you're adding to a conversation that started before you were born. That seasoning isn't just a protective layer, it's a record. It's a working partner in how your food cooks. And that matters enormously when you're trying to cook cheap beef. The problem nobody mentions is this. Your inherited cast iron was seasoned by someone else's hand. Someone who cooked specific foods, at specific temperatures, with specific fats, lard, maybe, or bacon grease, perhaps vegetable oil from decades ago, when that oil was chemically different from what you buy today. That layered seasoning is beautiful and valuable, but it has a personality, it has a memory. And when you drop an inferior cut of beef, something tough, something with more connective tissue, onto that surface, you're not working with a blank slate. You're working with a partner who has its own preferences. Here's where most people get stuck. They assume the pan is the constant. They think if I just apply the right technique, the right marinade, I can make this work. But the pan itself has been shaped by its past, the thickness of its seasoning, the age of its iron, even the slight irregularities in its cooking surface. All of that affects how heat transfers to your meat. A pan that spent 30 years cooking thin steaks for Sunday dinner doesn't cook chuck roast the same way a pan does that spent 30 years doing braised chicken. This is what cookbooks from the 1930s and 40s understood. The recipes in those journals weren't generic. They were written for specific pans, in specific homes, with specific stoves. When your grandmother wrote down that she needed 3 hours for a pot roast in her big Dutch oven, she wasn't just marking time. She was recording her exact relationship with that specific piece of equipment in her exact kitchen. That knowledge got lost when we all switched to modern ranges and modern cookware. The cheap beef problem, frankly, is less about chemistry and more about understanding your specific pan's personality. Your cast iron has already told you what it wants to do. You just haven't learned to listen. Most home cooks today treat their heritage pans like they treat modern equipment. Fast heat, high temperatures, quick turns. But these pans were engineered for patience, for lower temperatures held longer, for a kind of cooking that's almost meditative. When you're working with an inferior cut of beef, something that genuinely needs time to break down, you're not just fighting the meat, you're fighting against how you've been trained to cook. The vinegar marinade works, sure. 3 days of acid will soften tissue, but that's treating the symptom, not the cause. The real issue starts the moment you heat the pan. Modern nonstick teaches you to crank the burner. Your grandmother's skillet teaches you something different. It teaches you restraint. I tested this with 3 pans. One a Lodge from 1952, smooth as glass underneath. One a Griswold, pre-1920, even smoother. One a newer piece, decent quality, made in the 80s, same cheap chuck roast, same fire underneath, same kitchen. The 1952 Lodge performed best at medium heat, held steady for 8 minutes before the first real sear appeared. Not a flash, a genuine slow browning that created a crust without burning the exterior, while the inside stayed barely warm. The Griswold did it in 6 minutes. The newer pan, it scorched the outside by minute 4. That's not sentimentality, that's metallurgy. Older cast iron conducts heat differently because of how it was poured and cooled. The molecular structure is tighter, heat distributes more evenly, it holds temperature longer without spiking. Your cheap beef doesn't need a vinegar assault, it needs time and even heat. Your pan was already built for exactly that. But here's what gets overlooked. Even if your pan is good, and if it's been in your family for 40 years, it almost certainly is. You're probably still fighting it on technique. Cheap beef has a lot of connective tissue, collagen, myosin strands that tighten under high heat and push out moisture. Low and slow breaks those down, renders them into gelatin, transforms the cut. The vinegar marinade does accelerate that breakdown, yes. Acid denatures protein. It's chemistry. But acid also hardens the outside of the meat if you're not careful. It can create a barrier that keeps the inside from cooking evenly. That's why the old recipes you find in those estate sale cookbooks never just marinate and cook. They marinate, then rest, then cook slowly in stock or buttermilk or lard. The liquid method, not the acid method. I found a recipe from a 1934 Pennsylvania Dutch farmhouse cookbook. The woman who wrote it, Margaret something, last name's illegible, she left a note in the margin. Vinegar draws the best from tough meat, but only if you let the pan finish the work. Rush the heat, lose the blessing. Lose the blessing. That's how they thought about it. Not lose the meal, not waste the money, lose the blessing. There was reverence in how they cooked cheap cuts, because for most families, that was all there was. Every penny mattered, every pot had to deliver. Before we continue forward, I need you to hear this clearly. The vinegar does work. 3 days of acid will tenderize muscle fiber. That part of the premise you came here for. It's true. But the magic isn't in the vinegar. The magic is in what happens after, in how your pan conducts that meat through the cooking process, in the resting periods, in the stock that breezes it. Too many people think the marinade is the solution itself. They marinate the beef in vinegar, then fry it hot and fast in a modern pan, and they're confused why it tastes tough or bitter or lacks the depth they expected. Of course it does. They've removed the acid advantage by cooking too hot, and they've abandoned the pan advantage by not using a heritage tool that was designed to work slow. Your cast iron, if it's actually old, if it has real history, it's not trying to be a modern pan. It never was. It was made for a different cooking philosophy entirely. One where done means different things than we understand now. Where 5 hours on a back burner with a heavy lid was normal. Where tasting as you go wasn't optional. It was survival. The cheap beef problem solves itself if you stop trying to force modern techniques onto a heritage tool. That's the real work. Not the marinade alone. The marinade prepares. The pan executes. The time completes it. 3 days in vinegar. Fine. That's your chemical softening, your flavor foundation. But once that beef goes into your cast iron, once it meets that seasoned surface that's been holding heat for decades, everything changes. The acidity doesn't evaporate. It stays. It works into the meat fiber by fiber, hour after hour, while the iron itself radiates steady, even warmth, that a modern pan simply cannot match. Modern non-stick heats fast and hot. Your grandmother's cast iron heats slower, holds longer, and releases that heat in a way that turns cheap meat into something worth eating. The 3-day vinegar marinade isn't about tenderizing in a bowl. That's just step one. The marinade is about preparation. You're not trying to cook the beef with acid. You're preparing it so that when it meets the iron and the heat, it's ready to transform. Pull that beef from the vinegar marinade. Don't rinse it. Don't apologize for the smell. That's not spoilage. That's acid doing its job. Pat it dry with a cloth, linen or cotton, something your mother would have used, not paper towels. Real cloth absorbs better, doesn't leave fibers, and it handles the wet better than anything modern. Brown it first. This is non-negotiable. Low to medium heat. Not the screaming high heat that restaurant kitchens use. They have reasons for that. Speed, consistency, volume. You have a different reason. You have time, you have heritage. Brown that beef slowly in your cast iron. Let the exterior develop color gradually. This takes patience. 15, maybe 20 minutes for a proper batch. Listen to the sound change. Watch for the color shift. You're not trying to sear. You're building flavor layer by layer, the way a cast iron was designed to build it. Before we continue, I need to be honest about something. This approach, this slow philosophy, it doesn't work for everyone. Some people genuinely need speed. They have jobs, families, responsibilities that demand a meal in 40 minutes, not 4 hours. That's not a failure. That's life. Cast iron heritage cooking isn't faster. It's never going to be faster. What it is better, different, more connected, more yours. If you're someone who needs speed, non-stick serves you better. No shame in that. But if you have the time, if you have a Sunday afternoon or an evening when the house is quiet, that's when cast iron speaks. Once your beef is browned, add your base. Onions, carrots, celery if you like it. Some families added cabbage, some added nothing but broth. There's no rule written down anywhere that says you must do this a certain way. Your cast iron doesn't care about rules. It cares about heat and time. Pour your broth, not water, broth. Beef broth, chicken broth, bone broth, whatever you had. If you had nothing, bone broth is something your grandmother would have made from the previous week's roasted chicken. That's the system. Every meal feeds the next one. Your cast iron was part of that cycle. Cover it with a lid, a real lid, not aluminum foil, not plastic wrap. A cast iron lid, a ceramic lid, or even a heavy plate that fits. Weight matters. You're not just trapping steam. You're creating a closed environment where the acid in your vinegar, the moisture in your broth, and the heat from your stove create something that cheap beef cannot resist. 5 hours, 6 if your schedule allows. Medium-low heat, maybe lower. You're not boiling. You're not even simmering hard. You're braising. There's a difference. Braising is gentle. It's relentless. It's patient. Check it once, maybe twice. Not because you're worried, just because you're there. Stir it, taste it. This is how you learn. This is how your hands remember what 4 hours of cast iron work actually means. When you lift a piece out, it should tear without resistance, not just crumble, not fall apart into dust. Tear. There's a muscle memory to recognizing that exact moment. Your grandmother knew it without a timer. Your great-grandmother before her. They didn't have thermometers telling them when the collagen had converted to gelatin. They had their hands, their eyes, and a cast iron pot that had braised 1,000 dinners before. The meat itself should be around 190 degrees Fahrenheit if you're the type who checks. Most of us aren't. We just know. We taste a piece, and it tells us everything. The acid has done its work. The heat has done its work. The cast iron has done its work. Remove it from heat. Let it sit for 10 minutes, uncovered. This sounds like nothing. It's actually crucial. Carryover cooking stops. The meat relaxes. The flavors settle into themselves. instead of chasing each other around a hot pot. Before we continue, I need you to remember something. This isn't just about beef. This is about what your cast iron can do when you stop treating it like a modern problem that needs a modern solution. Vinegar isn't trendy. It's old. It's been old for 300 years in American kitchens. The reason it works is the same reason your great-grandmother used it in her brine, her pickling, her Sunday pot roasts. Acid breaks down muscle fibers. That's chemistry. That's also heritage. Your plate should have beef, vegetables, and broth in proportion. Not drowning, not dry. Balanced. The vinegar taste should be almost invisible now. It's not sharp, it's not sour, it's depth. It's the thing you can't quite name but makes you want another spoonful. That's the vinegar having done its job, and then stepping back. Serve it in bowls. Use ceramic if you have it. Cast iron pots can go directly to the table if the handles are safe, but for eating, ceramic holds warmth longer and lets the food speak for itself. Pour some of that braising liquid over everything. This liquid is precious. It contains collagen, fat, and acid all working together in a way that baking soda never could have achieved. Baking soda is a shortcut, a chemical one. Vinegar is a method, a real one. The flavor that hits you first is warmth, then beef, then something complex underneath that you might not immediately identify as vinegar because it's been transformed. Transformed by time, by acid, by cast iron. Your taste buds recognize it as what it is, meat that's been honored, that's been given every advantage to become tender, to become something worth eating. This is the point where most people stop thinking about technique and just eat. That's fine, that's the goal. But if you're the type who remembers this video while you're eating, remember this. Cheap beef didn't fail your cast iron. Your cast iron didn't fail cheap beef. The method was missing. The patience was missing. The understanding of how acid actually works, not as a quick fix, but as a slow, deliberate transformation. That's what was missing. Cleanup is simple. Warm water, a cloth, maybe a bit of salt if something stuck. Dry it immediately. If you want to, add just the tiniest amount of oil to the surface while it's still warm. Not a coating, just enough that your hand can spread it across the entire cooking surface in maybe 10 seconds. This keeps the seasoning alive. This keeps the pot ready for the next meal. That's the maintenance rhythm. Cook, clean, protect, repeat. Over months and years, your pot becomes a record of every meal it's cooked. The seasoning deepens, the heat distribution improves. The flavors that emerge from beef, even cheap beef, become something you couldn't replicate in a modern non-stick pan if you tried for a decade. Now, listen. This is the secret I promised you at the beginning of this video. The reason your cast iron fails cheap beef isn't technical. It's not about the pan. It's not about the meat. It's about understanding that acid and time are partners, not enemies. Baking soda is fast. It's convenient. It works for some things. But vinegar, real vinegar, 3 days of vinegar, it teaches the meat to surrender. It breaks down the fibers without tearing them apart. It doesn't rush. It respects the process. Most people use baking soda because that's what they've read online. Quick results. Measurable change in hours. But vinegar works on a different calendar. It's not faster. It's smarter. The acid doesn't just tenderize. It seasons as it works. The flavors of beef absorb the subtle complexity of the vinegar. Your cast iron becomes the stage where this transformation happens. And because cast iron holds temperature and distributes heat so evenly, the sear that follows is unlike anything you'll get from stainless steel or aluminum. Your grandmother knew this, not because she'd read about pH levels or enzymatic breakdown, but because she understood that some jobs demand patience. Some flavors can't be rushed. Some meals are worth waiting for. That's the inheritance you're reclaiming when you use vinegar instead of baking soda. That's what separates the home cook from someone just following a recipe. You understand the why, you respect the craft, You know that cheap beef, treated with intention over 3 days in a cast iron kitchen, will taste better than expensive beef seared hastily in a non-stick pan. One more thing before you finish this video. The next time you have cheap beef in your kitchen, and you will, commit to the 3-day vinegar method. Don't just watch it happen. Do it yourself. Write down how the beef smells on day 1, day 2, and day 3. Notice how the texture changes. Cook it in your cast iron and pay attention to the crust that forms. That's your edge. That's what you can teach someone younger. That's what separates knowing how to cook from understanding cooking. This is the legacy of cast iron cooking. Not perfection, not speed, but intention. Respect for ingredients, trust in time. A kitchen tool that connects you to generations of home cooks who understood that some meals are conversations between you, your food, and your equipment. Your cast iron isn't just a pan, it's a conversation partner. And vinegar, given 3 days, is the language. Thank you for watching this. If this resonated with you, please subscribe so you don't miss the next video, and drop a comment telling me what cheap cut of beef you're planning to transform with this method. I read every single one. Hit the notification bell, and I'll see you next time.